So, imagine just for a second that you are the ultimate outsider. And I don't mean, you're from a different country or you speak a different language or you just feel a little bit socially awkward at a cocktail party.
Right. Something a bit more extreme than that.
Yeah, much more extreme. I mean, you are a human being, biologically speaking. You've got the DNA, the thumbs, the physiology, all of that. But you were born on Mars.
And raised entirely by Martians.
Exactly. You think in Martian, you feel in Martian, and then suddenly, as a young adult, you are just dropped right onto Earth.
It is the absolute classic fish out of water story, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's dialed up to this massive interplanetary scale. You have a character who is hardware compatible with us, but his software is completely alien.
Hardware versus software. That is a really great way to put it, and that is the central premise we are unpacking today for you. We are doing a deep dive into the story of Valentine Michael Smith, the man from Mars.
But we should probably clarify right away what exactly we're looking at.
Yeah, because this is key for everyone listening. We aren't just looking at the standard paperback you might have, read in high school. We are diving into the source material that is the uncut version of Robert A. Heinlein's masterpiece, Stranger in a Strange Land.
That distinction is just massive. We really have to address that right off the bat. The source material we are using is the original manuscript.
The big one.
The very big one. When this book was first published back in 1961, it was considered so radical, so sexually and religiously provocative for the time, that the editors at Putnam basically took a machete to it. They cut about 60,000 words.
Which is insane.
It really is. They trimmed it down to around 160,000 words.
That is basically a whole other novel's worth of text they just threw in the trash.
Yep, but the version we are analyzing today is the full 220,000-word vision. It restores the texture. The satire is much sharper, the politics are far denser, and we get a much clearer picture of the background.
We even get the backstory of how the whole thing started, right?
We do. In the preface to this uncut edition, we learned that this whole concept came out of a brainstorming session Heinlein had with the legendary editor John W. Campbell way back in the day.
Oh, right. They were looking for a specific kind of pitch.
Exactly. They were looking for a Kipling's Mowgli, but on Mars type of story.
Which is just such a fantastic hook. You take that feral child concept, raised by wolves in the jungle, but instead of wolves, it is ancient, non-human entities on a dying planet.
It changes the entire dynamic.
It does. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore the factual events of Smith's return to Earth as presented in this uncut manuscript. We want to look at the political firestorm it creates, the absolute clash of cultures between human and Martian, and the really colorful cast of characters trying to either control this man or save him.
And the big question I want us to keep coming back to as we go through this is the so what of it all.
The underlying meaning.
Right. Why does this matter beyond just being a cool sci-fi story? It matters because when you strip away every single bit of human culture from a man and then drop him into the middle of a complex, bureaucratic, cynical Earth society, he acts as a mirror.
He reflects us back to ourselves.
Precisely. Smith reflects our own oddities back at us. He makes the things we take for granted, like money or jealousy or even wearing clothing, seem completely absurd.
So let's start at the beginning, or actually before the beginning. We need to establish how Smith got to Mars in the first place. This is the backstory of what the book calls the preposterous heritage.
Right. This is really the first segment of our analysis today, the first expedition, the ship called the Envoy. Now, in this uncut version, we get a fascinating, almost cynical look at the logic, or rather the lack of logic, in how this crew was selected.
It wasn't just a matter of picking the best pilots and scientists and going, was it?
Does it make too much sense?
Obviously.
Not at all. And this is where the heavy satire really starts kicking in early in the text. The University of Edinburgh and the Institute for Social Studies were absolutely terrified of the psychological stress of the mission.
Which is fair. It's a long trip.
Oh, totally fair. We are talking about a trip that takes nearly 3 years round trip. 8 humans, crammed in a tin can, millions of miles from home. So they ran the numbers and decided the only stable configuration was 4 married couples.
Which, sounds like a pretty sound theory on paper until you actually try to find 4 married couples who are also expert astrogators, semanticists, biologists, and engineers.
Exactly. It is a complete HR nightmare. They just couldn't find a perfect match. The source material notes a really fascinating paradox here. The perfect crews were actually too compatible.
Wait, too compatible? How does that work?
They were so happy with each other that they lacked the spark or the grit needed for actual survival in a crisis.
So they would just happily die together.
Pretty much. So they went with a rump crew solution. The captain, Michael Brandt, basically used his intuition, and probably some inside information, to handpick a team that looked good on paper, but was chemically volatile.
I love the detail about Dr. Winifred Coburn in this part. It just really highlights the desperation of the selection process.
Ah, yes, the horse-faced spinster cementician, as she's described.
Right. Captain Brandt actually flew to Australia to propose marriage to her, a woman he barely even knew, just to get her specific skills onto the ship.
That is a level of dedication to the mission that frankly borders on insanity.
Totally. And it sets the stage for disaster. The Envoy launches, it lands on Mars, radios back to Earth, and then just dead air.
In 25 years. No distress signal, no goodbye, just complete silence.
Until the second expedition, the Champion, led by Captain Van Trump, finally makes it there a quarter-century later. And this is where the story really kicks off. They find the Envoy.
And they send back 3 messages that just shake the Earth to its core. Message 1, rocket ship Envoy located, no survivors. Then message 2, Mars is inhabited.
Which changes everything.
But then the correction that actually changes history. Message 3, correction. 1 survivor of Envoy located.
Valentine Michael Smith.
The child of the mission. The lineage here is essentially a soap opera written by a geneticist. Smith is the biological son of the Captain Michael Brandt and the atomics engineer Dr. Mary Jane Lyle Smith.
But wait, let's unpack that lineage for a second, because the names matter here. Dr. Mary Jane Lyle Smith, the mother, was actually married to the ship's surgeon, Dr. Ward Smith.
Correct. It was an affair. And the log of the Envoy, which becomes this closely guarded secret on Earth later on, reveals a truly gruesome end to that first mission.
The tension finally snapped.
Violently. Dr. Ward Smith delivered the baby by cesarean section. His wife, Mary Jane, died on the table. And then realizing the child wasn't his, probably by looking at the blood type or the facial features, the surgeon cut the captain's throat and then his own.
That is an incredibly heavy start to a life. Just pure human tragedy and violence in a tiny metal tube on a red planet.
And because of this incredibly chaotic beginning, Smith ends up with this preposterous heritage. He isn't just a guy. He is a walking legal anomaly.
Right. It is a perfect storm of legalities. Let's break down why he's so important to the people on Earth. First, the original crew had signed a gentleman adventurer's contract.
Which is this old-world maritime concept.
Exactly. It basically states that the survivors inherit everything from the deceased partners. Since Smith is the absolute only survivor, he inherits the estates of all 8 crew members.
And we have to remember, these weren't poor academics on a grant.
Far from it.
Through his mother, he owns the patent to the Lyle Drive. That is the very technology that makes space travel possible in this universe.
So he gets royalties on every ship.
Every single one. Plus, he has a controlling interest in lunar enterprises. He is arguably the richest human being alive the moment he is discovered. But it gets even crazier than the money.
The Larkin decision?
Right. This is a brilliant piece of world-building Heinlein drops in. The Larkin decision is a legal precedent in this future history that states that the person or entity who maintains occupation of a planet is the sovereign of that planet.
So, technically speaking, under human law, Smith owns Mars.
In the eyes of Earth law, absolutely yes. Because he was born there and lived there continuously, he is a sovereign nation of one.
The Emperor of Mars.
Basically. He is financially independent and politically explosive. And yet, at the same time, he has the mind of an infant, at least by Earth standards.
Which brings us to the man himself. We need to really analyze the second segment, the man from Mars. Let's talk physiology first, because when they finally bring him back to Earth on the Champion, he isn't exactly ready to run a marathon.
No, he's barely ready to breathe. You have to imagine the massive physical shock. Mars has about 1/3 the gravity of Earth.
So going to Earth is crushing him.
Literally crushing him. Suddenly, Smith weighs 2.5 times what he's used to. Imagine walking around your daily life with 2 other people strapped to your back. He can't even lift his own arm without exhaustion.
So they have to keep him at Bethesda Medical Center when he arrives.
Right, in a hydraulic bed.
Yeah.
It is basically a high-tech water tank just to keep his heart from failing and his bones from snapping under the atmospheric pressure.
And he has absolutely no immunity to anything.
0. He's never encountered Earth bacteria or viruses. A common cold would kill him in a matter of hours. So he's kept in a sterile bubble, getting total blood transfusions and constant inoculations. He is physically incredibly fragile.
But mentally, that is where it gets really fascinating. The source material uses this exact phrase to describe him. He is a man by ancestry, a Martian by environment.
And that is the core conflict of the entire story. He doesn't really speak English. He knows the vocabulary, but he uses it like a code book.
Like a code book, right.
To him, words are just symbols to be translated one by one. He doesn't have any of the cultural context that gives language its actual meaning. But he brings with him Martian concepts that don't translate into English at all.
Well, we have to talk about grokking. We absolutely cannot do a deep dive on this book without unpacking that word. I mean, it literally entered the Oxford English Dictionary because of this manuscript.
We really do. Grok.
Yeah.
It is the single most famous term from the source material. In the book, it's explained that to grok means to understand something, but not intellectually. It's not just saying, oh, I get what you're saying.
It's deeper than that.
Much deeper. It means to understand something so thoroughly that you become one with it.
Can you give us an analogy for how the book explains it?
Sure. Think of it like drinking water. Once you drink the water, it becomes part of your blood. It becomes your cells. You can't separate the water from yourself anymore. If I grok you, there is no separation between my observer self and your observed self. We are part of the exact same reality. It's a profound level of empathy, comprehension, and almost a physical assimilation of a concept or a person.
And this ties directly into their view of death, doesn't it? The Martian view.
Yes, the concept of discorporation. To a Martian, and therefore to Smith, death isn't the end. It's just a change in state.
And it is voluntary.
Completely voluntary. You don't die in fear or pain. You discorporate when your specific task is done or when your physical body is simply worn out. And the old ones, the spirits of the ancestors, they are still around on Mars.
They actually run the society on Mars.
They do. They advise the living. So Smith doesn't fear death because in his worldview, you don't really leave the room. You just stop using the microphone. You're still there.
Which totally explains his calmness when he gets to Earth. He's surrounded by frantic doctors and panicked politicians, and he's just existing. He also has this concept of the water brotherhood, which is vital to understand.
This is absolutely crucial for survival on a dry planet. Water is incredibly scarce on Mars. If you share water with someone, you are creating a bond that is closer than blood.
You become water brothers.
You're water brothers. It implies absolute trust and absolute loyalty. If you are my water brother, your life is my life. It is the highest possible social contract available to a Martian.
And physically, he deals with the intense stress of Earth through these really deep trance states.
Right. When things get too overwhelming for him, too much noise, too much gravity, just too much confusion, he withdraws. He can slow his heart rate down to something like 20 beats a minute.
He practically stops living.
He can stay underwater for incredible amounts of time. He just goes away until he's ready to deal with reality again. It's a psychological and physical survival mechanism, but to the Earth doctors, it looks like he's dying or slipping into a coma.
So let's set the scene for you listening. You have this super wealthy, planet-owning, gravity-crushed, trance-inducing man floating in a hospital tank. And outside that hospital door, the political sharks are circling, which moves us into segment 3, the political chessboard.
And it is a very messy board. At the top of the food chain is Secretary General Joseph Douglas. He is the leader of the Federation, which makes him basically the president of Earth.
But the sources paint him as, well, a bit of a weak politician, really.
He's trying to balance a lot of plates.
Yeah.
He's balancing planetary peace, the aggressive Eastern Coalition, and his own political career survival.
He seems absolutely terrified of Smith.
He is. He is terrified of what Smith represents legally and financially. If Smith asserts his rights under that Larkin decision we talked about, he could technically evict the entire Federation from Mars.
He could destabilize the entire global economy overnight.
Easily. So Douglas's goal is to keep Smith totally isolated, manipulate him into signing over the rights to Mars quietly, and prevent an interplanetary war. He even goes so far as to stage a completely fake interview to calm the public.
Right. This is such a great satire of media manipulation in the manuscript. They put an actor in a wheelchair, broadcast it on stereo vision, and have him say, "Hi, folks, I'm doing fine. Everything is great."
It's a completely desperate move. They want to keep the public happy and hide the fact that they absolutely cannot control the real Smith. But here's the fascinating thing about Joseph Douglas. He isn't really the one pulling the strings in his own administration.
No, that would be his wife, Agnes Douglas.
Agnes is a force of nature. She manages the political strategy. She manages Joe. But the source material gives us a hilarious and frankly terrifying detail about how she actually makes policy decisions.
Astrology.
Astrology as actual government policy. She won't make a single move without consulting her astrologer, Madame Alexandre Vizant.
There is a really great comedic bit in the notes where Madame Besant is trying to cast a horoscope for Smith, but she can't do it because he wasn't born on Earth.
Exactly. There is no zodiac reference for Mars.
Right. She is asking herself, was Mars in the house of Venus? Well, no, because you are physically on Mars.
The whole system breaks down. She ends up faking it just to reassure Agnes, advising her to proceed with calm wisdom. But think about the sharp satire there. Heinlein is showing us that the fate of 2 entire planets is resting on a horoscope that is technically impossible to cast.
It really highlights the absurdity of human leadership when you compare it to the cold, rational Martian logic Smith operates on. Standing in opposition to this corrupt administration is the press, specifically a guy named Ben Caxton.
Caxton is your classic, hard-boiled, cynical columnist. If you think of a futuristic Walter Winchell, that's him. He smells a rat immediately. He heavily suspects Smith as being held prisoner at Bethesda.
Because the government is acting way too secretive.
Right. He is the one who realizes that if the government is hiding Smith, it's because Smith has power they want to steal for themselves.
And Ben tries to bust into the hospital using a very specific legal tool from this universe.
He uses a fair witness. Now, this is one of my absolute favorite world-building details in the Uncut book. A fair witness is a highly trained legal professional. They are trained for total recall and absolute, unwavering objectivity.
They basically act as human recording devices for legal disputes.
Exactly. They see only what is actually there, making zero inferences or assumptions.
There's that famous example in the book to explain how they work. Ben asks the witness what color a barn is.
Yes, I love that part.
Yeah.
They drive past a barn. Ben asks the fair witness, what color is that barn? The fair witness looks at it and says, it is red on this side.
Because he cannot see the other side.
Exactly. He absolutely will not assume the whole barn is red just because the side facing him is.
Hey.
So Caxton takes a fair witness named James Oliver Cavendish to the hospital to formally demand to see Smith.
And they are shown the fake Smith, the actor from the Stereo Vision broadcast.
Right. Now, Cavendish doesn't immediately shout, that's an imposter.
Yeah.
Because as a fair witness, he doesn't know what the real Smith looks like.
All right.
But later, he notes an incredibly crucial physical detail. He says, that man has no calluses on his feet.
Which proves it's an actor.
Right. A man who spent his entire life in the low gravity of Mars and then spent his time on Earth floating in a water tank would not have the feet of a man who walks on hard Earth sidewalks every day.
It's a brilliant little piece of detective work. But despite this proof, they get stonewalled by the administration. Ben actually gets captured by the secret police. And that leaves the door wide open for the real catalyst of this first act, Jill Boardman.
Which brings us to segment 4, the catalyst.
Yeah.
Jill is a nurse at Bethesda Medical Center. She knows Ben Caxton. She's sort of his girlfriend, sort of not. They have a complicated dynamic. But mostly she's just incredibly curious.
She's a rule breaker. She sneaks past the armed guards just to see the man from Mars for herself. And this one meeting completely changes the course of human history.
She walks in, she sees this frail guy floating in the tank, and she does something very simple and very human. She offers him a glass of water.
To her, it's just standard nursing care. You know, here, have a drink, you look thirsty.
But to Smith, she has just initiated the absolute most sacred rite of his entire culture. She offered water, he drank, they shared. Boom, they're water brothers.
And he trusts her implicitly from that exact second onward.
Implicitly. It overrides everything else in his worldview. And then we get this interaction that really highlights just how alien his mindset is. Smith doesn't know what a woman is.
Right. The crew of the Envoy died before he could learn.
Exactly. He sees that Jill is different from the male doctors he has interacted with. Her voice is different, her shape is different, so he asks to see her unclothed so he can grok the difference.
And Jill, to her immense credit, doesn't scream or run away or call the guards. She realizes he is completely innocent.
She notes in the text that he looks like an angel. There is absolutely no lust in his request, just pure, unadulterated scientific curiosity. She refuses, obviously, but the interaction deeply bonds them.
But that innocence is dangerous. Jill realizes that the administration is lying to the public. She decides to bug the room. She actually puts a physical listening device in the room next door.
And she hears Douglas and his cronies trying to violently coerce Smith into signing legal documents handing over his rights. She realizes the Smith they showed on TV was definitely a fake. And worse, She knows Smith is in imminent danger of being liquidated to cover up the entire fraud.
Because if the real Smith disappears, they can just keep using the actor to sign whatever they want, so she decides to break him out. This brings us to segment 5, the escape.
It is a sequence that plays out almost like a comedy of errors, but it turns deadly serious very fast. Jill finds Smith, and because he is her water brother, he will do anything she says.
If she said jump out the window, he would literally do it.
Without hesitation. So she decides the only way out is to disguise him.
I really love the visual of this escape. She tapes stockings to his legs to hide the body hair. She puts a nurse's cape on him. And Smith is just totally passive through all of this. He is waiting.
He is practicing his Martian patience. They manage to bluff their way out of the hospital, get to the roof, and take a flying taxi. Smith is completely overwhelmed by the sensory input, the configurations of the city lights, the sheer size of the sky, but he trusts Jill completely.
They head straight to Ben Caxton's apartment, but of course, Ben isn't there.
Because he's already been snatched by the government's secret police earlier that day.
Right, so they're hiding out in the apartment. Smith steps on the grass rug. Ben has this living glass planted in his living room, and Smith is amazed by it. But then the police raid happens. 2 agents, Berquist and Johnson, break down the door.
And this is the major climax of part 1 of the manuscript. This is where we see that Smith isn't just a frail, helpless victim.
It's terrifying, really. Johnson strikes Jill.
And to Smith, this is an impossible wrongness. A water brother is being hurt. He groks the wrongness of the situation. He reaches out his hand, and Johnson just disappears.
Just gone. No laser zap, no puff of smoke.
Completely gone. Rotated into non-existence. Discorporated. Then the other agent, Berquist, draws a gun. Smith reaches out again. Berquist is gone.
We really have to unpack this moment. It is violence, obviously, but it isn't killing in the way a human thinks of it, is it?
No, not at all. Smith doesn't hate these men. He doesn't act out of anger or rage. He sees that their configuration is wrong. It's flawed. It's actively hurting his brother.
So he just fixes the flaw.
He corrects the universe by removing the flaw. He sends them to the other side, which to him is just a different room. They're still around, just not here. But to Jill, you have to remember her perspective. She just saw 2 grown men vanish into thin air.
She goes completely hysterical for a second.
Naturally, she is screaming, trying to understand what just happened. But then her professional nurse training kicks back in. Smith, having exerted all this energy, goes into one of his deep trances. He curls up into a ball and drops his heart rate.
And she literally packs him into a large suitcase.
A literal suitcase. She lugged this massive suitcase with the savior of Mars inside and out the service elevator. And now she is a fugitive on the run with a comatose Martian in her luggage. She desperately needs a safe place to hide.
And that leads us to segment 6, the sanctuary. She heads to the one man Ben Caxton told her could help in an emergency, Jubal Harshaw.
Jubal Harshaw. He is, frankly, one of the great characters in all of science fiction. He lives in this lavish, heavily fortified estate in the Poconos. He is a lawyer, a medical doctor, a writer, and a philosopher.
He is a neo-pessimist philosopher, as he calls himself. He's grumpy, deeply cynical, but incredibly hospitable. He is the ultimate rugged individualist, the kind of guy who wants the government to stay the hell off his lawn.
He surrounds himself with these 3 beautiful secretaries, Anne, Miriam, and Dorcas. But notice Heinlein's twist here in the source material. They aren't just eye candy. They are hyper-competent professionals.
Right. Anne is actually a fair witness herself. She has total recall. She functions as his human tape recorder.
And Jubal's writing method is fascinating. He dictates trashy pulp fiction stories to them, like a story called The Other Manger, just to make money while he sits by his pool, drinks, and critiques the universe.
So Jill arrives at this very strange estate with the corpse in the suitcase.
Jubal is entirely unfazed by it. He treats it like a minor curiosity. He says something like, "Is he dead? No. Well, bring him inside then." He uses his medical skills to revive Smith. And here's a really key interaction. Jill tries to tell Jubal about all the legal rights, the massive wealth, the ownership of Mars. She thinks that's why Jubal should help them.
Because it's a huge legal case. But Jubal does not care.
He literally calls it lawyer's hogwash. He does not care about Smith, the sovereign of Mars. He cares about Smith, the guest and the patient. He believes deeply in the sanctity of his own home, which he calls Freedom Hall.
If you are under his roof, you are safe from the outside world.
It is an ancient, almost medieval code of hospitality. Once you are his guest, he will fight the entire planet to protect you.
So Smith wakes up in this new environment. It's chaotic, but it's genuinely friendly. He is finally surrounded by people who don't want to use him or manipulate him.
And he begins to grok them. He sees the water in Jubal's swimming pool. To a Martian, so much water is mind-blowing. He sees the casual sharing of food. Jubal, meanwhile, realizes the government is going to come down on his estate like a ton of bricks once they track Jill there.
So he starts setting up this massive time bomb of legal maneuvers.
He sets up press releases, legal injunctions, all ready to fire off to protect Smith from the government. Not because he wants to be involved in global politics, but because he absolutely loves a fight against corrupt authority.
This really brings us to segment 7, the world building and social satire. Throughout all this intense action and plotting, Heinlein is painting a very vivid picture of a specific future Earth.
It is a sharp satire of our own world, just amplified. For instance, you have the Fasterites. They are this incredibly powerful, aggressive church that perfectly combines religion with show business and shameless commercialism.
It's a very cynical view of megachurches. You also have consumerism running totally wild. The wise girl Malthusian lozenges are a great example.
Right. Candy-flavored birth control pills marketed aggressively like chewing gum. It paints a picture of a society that is completely obsessed with pleasure, convenience, and consumption.
And the stark contrast between that frenetic, selling everything human world and Smith is the whole point of the narrative.
Exactly. The humans, Douglas, the reporters, the police, are all hurried, anxious, deeply worried about money and maintaining power. Smith is infinitely patient. Waiting is, as he always says. He sits and waits for the universe to unfold at his own pace. He listens to the old ones.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the first half of The Uncut Stranger in a Strange Land, where does that actually leave us?
We have a literal powder keg on our hands. Smith is loose. He has these godlike powers. He can make people simply disappear with a thought. But he has the emotional maturity and cultural understanding of a baby.
He is hiding out with an eccentric anarchist lawyer. The global government is desperately trying to cover up a massive fraud and a kidnapping before the press blows it wide open.
And through it all, the very definition of what it means to be human is up for grabs. Smith has human DNA, but every single other thing about his mind is Martian.
It really raises a provocative thought for you listening. Think about it. Can a being with the power to simply edit people out of existence ever actually fit into human morality? Or does he represent something completely beyond us?
A new step in human evolution, perhaps. Or a terrifying alien threat disguised as one of us.
It's a real question of whether we will change him to fit our world or if he's going to change us.
And judging by the way he is beginning to grok things around him, I highly suspect he might be the one doing the changing.
We are going to leave you with that thought to mull over. Just imagine trying to explain what it means to be human. Explaining jealousy, laughter, or lying to someone who looks exactly like you, but who fundamentally thinks you are just a temporary ghost inhabiting a meat machine. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
See you next time.